Everyone, welcome back to Birth Podcast. I'm Ash. Today I'm introducing you to a yoga instructor, an activist, and a trauma-informed somatic clinician. Hala Khouri is someone who has spent her life not only uncovering healing practices to help bring us back to a sense of groundedness and safety in our bodies, especially when things get bare and vulnerable, but she's also someone who knows how to translate those very things to our social justice movements. And I'm so honored that she decided to join me. So listen in.
I am so excited to have an opportunity to talk to you. I've been following you for a while. I know you have a Lebanese background and your family came here during the Civil War. So I would love to just give the floor to you and ask you tell me a little bit about your background and then just how you came to the practice of yoga and how you got involved with social justice.
Sure. Thank you for having me. So I'm going to try to keep my answer short. So, I'm originally from Beirut, Lebanon, as you alluded to. And, I always say that our gift comes from our wound. And so coming from the Middle East, leaving because of the war and the violence and the chaos, for sure has impacted me. And it's no surprise I became a trauma specialist on my pathway in life. I've dedicated most of my life to trying to understand trauma, healing, how we build resilience, and also how we can be well together. Coming from a region that is in so much war and conflict and trauma, I knew in my body the connections between trauma and politics and power and oppression and colonization. And I think that, I'm still working that out for myself. And so my work has always been steeped in a search for collective well-being. What are the things that keep us from being well together? And what do we have to do to be able to participate in beloved community, to borrow from Martin Luther King and, the terminology that's often used by social justice activists over here. So that's been the bulk of my work. I can go into more detail.
Oh, I love that. You bring something up I find really interesting. And it's something that's passionate for me as well. And that is, the wars abroad aren't just abroad. They're actually within us each and every day, right? The war within. I think a lot of my work translating from being a war reporter to now is trying to translate that. What is that war within? So that we can begin to process and unravel and grapple with that into our freedom and liberation. I love the idea of doing that through the body. We sort of forget our bodies. Talk to me a little bit about how that connects with you and why you feel that, somatic practices, body work is so important.
Yeah. So somatic practices are basically practices that get us in touch with our own bodies, our own sensations, our own impulses, our own emotions. I've been reflecting a lot on how the last 20 years of increased surveillance, increased fear of terrorists, increased denial and fear of immigrants as potential threats, right? That our collective body I'll speak about the United States, is in a state of defense, scapegoating, otherizing in order to feel safe, right? After the trauma of 9/11, rather than saying, why are the terrorists mad at us? What have we done to create this ourselves, right? So as a collective, we don't want to look at the root cause, right? And so we think about how often we do that as individuals, right? We have an unresolved trauma, something that's so painful. What do we do if we don't have the tools? We defend, we blame, we lash out, we build walls, we scapegoat, right? So if we can't on a personal level tolerate the discomfort of connecting with the parts of ourselves that are connected to trauma or shame or fear, right? If we can't do that personally, how can we do that collectively? So I see these somatic practices and trauma healing practices as creating in our own bodies, minds, and hearts the conditions for which, so that we can participate in a larger body, right? That is grounded, resilient, and caring of others. So they're connected.
For sure. I just don't think that there's any separation. at all. Having worked with so many women, I think in yoga and throughout your career and throughout your work, do you find that there are very specific parts of the body that women in general have the most tension when it comes to addressing perhaps the trauma that they've experienced in their life?
I don't think I can generalize that there's a specific part of the body that women experience. I think more so I see the way that people socialized as women, and this includes like transgender men, right, who are socialized as women, the ways that we're socialized to be accommodating, to not get in the way, right? That's the trauma, is the trauma of not speaking up for ourselves, you know, because it's not safe for a lot of women, right? And as well as transgender people. So there's a lot around the throat and expressing ourselves, right? There's a lot around sexuality, power, boundaries, right? All the ways that society has delegated women and transgender people, right, into this sort of second class, right, in terms of power. So I think that that what I see in a lot of women is this lack of empowerment, right? Our voices not being heard and our boundaries not being respected. But if we have loud voices and strong boundaries, then we're seen as, you know, controlling or a bitch or whatever that is, right? There isn't a place in between. And I think a lot of women get stuck and can't navigate that if they don't have the tools and the support.
In what ways do you work with women like that? What are some of the things that you do in breath work or in the yoga class that you can sort of take them into to at least maybe tenderly and graciously find those areas of tension so that they might at least start to open up, even if it's just a little bit?
Yeah, I usually start with boundary work, because if our boundaries have been crossed or we don't feel like we have a right to have boundaries, then we're not going to feel safe in our own bodies, right? Our bodies aren't going to trust us to hold boundaries when we need them, right? And the world isn't going to feel safe. So I'll often start with boundary work, whether it's just literally like holding our hands out in front of us to like hold a physical boundary, or being able to say no, helping people tolerate the fear of setting a boundary, especially if they have a history of that boundary not being respected, or them not even knowing that they needed to set a boundary. And then especially for sexual assault survivors, and I know that it's Domestic Violence Awareness Month, from a trauma perspective, helping people get resourced in their own bodies. And that means with sexual violence and domestic violence and assault on the body, one of the trauma responses, the coping strategies, is to leave the body altogether, is to not have to confront those sensations. And so that's a coping strategy. So we don't want to get people into their bodies too quickly because they can get overwhelmed. So simple practices like grounding, orienting into our space. I mean, we could even try it right now, right? Like feeling your feet on the floor, or your butt in the chair, or your back against your couch, right? Looking for something solid in the body sometimes can help us settle a little bit. And if that doesn't work, even just orienting visually to your space and noticing the colors and the textures around sometimes can be settling. So I really prioritize helping folks find something that allows them to not be overwhelmed. It doesn't mean you feel great. It just means, okay, I feel my feet on the floor while I feel my anxiety, or I see this, beautiful candle in the room I'm in while I am sensing into my grief, right? Just that resource can often be the most helpful.
I like the simplicity of that. I like the simplicity of just taking a moment to just notice right where you are, wherever you are, right? Whether you are in the office, whether you can like step outside for a minute, take a walk on the sidewalk and just notice the neighborhood, just the little small things right where you are or within a short distance of where you are that gives you at least an outlet, almost a meditative outlet, even if it's just for a few minutes. I want to kind of weave into a little bit. You talked a lot about boundaries and creating that boundary, because we talk about not being overwhelmed. And sometimes as people, as human beings, we tend to lean into our extremities for maybe whatever fear of unknown that we have, no matter how small or big we feel it is. So, you know, in those spaces of sort of being present and taking notice, how can we play with the idea of setting a proper boundary for ourselves so we don't overwhelm, and maybe not creating a barrier such that we're blocking ourselves, like going to the other extreme of setting a barrier that ultimately prevents us maybe from opening up.
Yeah, and that's such a good point. I think that, like, you know, we're not going to go from having no boundaries to having like proper boundaries right away. Like there's always that learning, right? Where we'll often go to the other end of the spectrum where we're just like saying no to everything. And so, you know, I often say to folks, like, I don't expect you to be skillful at boundary setting right away, like off the get, because you haven't done it before, right? So, you know, knowing that we're going to be in a learning process, you know, and for me, one of my biggest revelations when I started to really look at boundaries was I've been socialized, like, I don't set a boundary until like harm is actively happening or I'm at wit's end, right? And it was a huge thing for me to realize I could set a boundary just as a preference. Like I could just say, no, I don't want to hang out with you, or it doesn't have to be an extreme situation. So this idea that I could have needs that were valid, even if it wasn't an emergency, like I could have needs and preferences. And that also is about allowing a boundary that's not about a wall, right? Because we trust ourselves to be caring for ourselves along the way, then letting people in doesn't feel as threatening because we also trust ourselves to say, actually, I let you in, but this isn't feeling so good anymore. So I need a little bit more space, right? I think that's the other piece, is being socialized as women to, it's like we have to know exactly what we want. You know, we can't change our minds, and if we change our minds, we're flaky. Versus, no, I got more information and now I'm changing my mind, right? That flexibility is really, really important in knowing how to have boundaries that are permeable.
That's a good way to put it. In terms of just even creating that relationship with your own body, because ultimately, I mean, even the practice of yoga is about kind of coming back to a centered space in your own body. How can we have sort of that conversation? One of the things I teach people and talk to people about is the idea that your body is sort of a character in your story. And so when you refer to so for example, for women, if you refer to your body as a she, then you're almost treating her a little bit more like your friend, who you would want to be caring and loving and kind and supportive to, rather than it. And so how can we translate that idea of creating sort of those boundaries for just our personal body when we are taking time for ourselves?
Yeah. I mean, I like this idea of, I often do this with like the nervous system. I'll say like, how's your nervous system doing, right? Am I grounded? Am I triggered, right? So that when we have, I don't know if this is the same as what you're saying, but like when we see our bodies or our nervous systems as a really important piece of who we are, right? But not necessarily all of who we are, because sometimes our nervous system is dysregulated. So there's me, and then there's my dysregulated nervous system. And how am I going to care for her, right? What am I going to do for this part of me that my heart is racing and my hands are clammy, right? When we can be witnessing, like a kind witness, like we're witnessing a friend. I often talk to people about like treating yourselves how we would treat a dear friend. And so many of us speak to ourselves in a way we would never speak to somebody else. That internal voice, right? We're awful to ourselves. So cultivating that compassion and that kindness. And for me, yoga is so much about that. It's a practice of reflecting on our relationship with our bodies and with ourselves, and noticing, and especially as women, how we internalize messages about thinness and youth and sexuality. Like we're all supposed to be young and horny and white, like basically, right? So, you know, if we don't fit into those boxes, what have we internalized? And even if you do fit into those boxes, it doesn't serve you, right? So how do we use our practice as an opportunity to revision our relationship with our bodies? And for some of us, the word is courage. It's about courageously entering our bodies. For some of us, it's compassion, right? Or kindness. Like, I think everybody has different work to do, but we can do it in a yoga practice.
Really appreciate that. I had a conversation with a friend the other day where we were both acknowledging that we had experiences in the past few weeks where we were having a conscious presence with our body, just saying, oh, this is what my body feels like right now. I this isn't my best day. But like being okay, allowing the sadness, allowing kind of even the aches that existed. And then, we sort of moved through it. And I think, interestingly, one of my favorite styles of yoga is yin yoga, because yin is about, it's almost the greatest opportunity in a yoga practice to sit there and actually talk to your body while you're in a stretch. And say, hi, like what is going on? Where is this tension right now? Why does this ache? And can I hold this? And it's like an internal conversation. I think that's a really beautiful thing. I would love, I don't know, say more to that. Say more to just those internal conversations of ache, and acknowledging sort of our pain, and however our trauma expresses itself in our bodies. Say more to that sort of expressionism.
Yeah, I often say that yoga is an opportunity to learn to be with discomfort without running away. And that it's all about that. We put ourselves in uncomfortable positions. We practice showing up without being overwhelmed. And that's what you're describing, that in a yin practice, it's slow enough where we can really be in that inquiry, right? Whereas if you're moving fast, that can be difficult, right? Now, some of us need to move fast in order to slow down without being overwhelmed, right? So I say to some folks like, okay, some of you need to like take a brisk walk or run around the block. Then you can come and do a slower practice and really get present, right? So our nervous systems need different things. But until we can learn to be with discomfort, we're never going to be able to heal, because you have to confront it. You have to feel it to heal it, right? But with trauma and unresolved trauma, feeling can be overwhelming, right? That's why we use tools of grounding, of breath, whatever we can do to get resourced enough to sit in that discomfort, as well as permission, right? Because you can be in a yin class and just dissociate. You can sit in that hip opener for an hour, but you've left your body, right? So the inquiry is, am I being in my body? Do I need to back off a little bit to be able to stay in my body? Or do I need to go a little deeper in order to anchor into the sensations? So it's all about our relationship to discomfort, using resourcing practices like breathing and grounding to be able to stay with our discomfort so it can transform. Our running away strategies, dissociation, hypervigilance, all the things we get addicted to so we don't feel, those coping strategies become the problem. And so when we start to slowly let go of those old coping strategies, we can replace them with new ones. And yoga practice can offer that to us.
All of what you've said has been really appreciated and really valuable, because I think that this gives, those listening an opportunity to explore if it's something that, maybe it's going to a yoga class for them, or maybe it's just taking time. As you said, you use the word resource, and I actually really like that language, because it's about, discovering where and how. It answers questions like where and how that give us a chance to identify something. So I really do appreciate all of that. I do want to give you the floor for a minute to promote your book. All of the work that you're doing. I just so appreciate the work that you're doing. I know that you've worked with a lot of people, and I know, and your trauma-informed courses are really fantastic and worthy. I look forward to hoping to participate more, but I would love to give you the floor to talk about exactly some of the stuff that you're doing.
The book has been a really great gift to me, to be able to basically, share the work of my last 2 decades of work in a book has been amazing. And the book is called Peace from Anxiety, Get Grounded, Build Resilience, and Stay Connected Amidst the Chaos. And, I wrote the book. Half the book got written during the pandemic. I'd already started the book before the pandemic hit, and the pandemic made it feel even more urgent to give folks tools, not just to manage anxiety, but to make meaning of their suffering. And what I feel proud of with the book is it's not just about our own personal anxiety. It really helps us see that we are social beings. We need each other to be well. And the first part of the book is these somatic tools, understanding the nervous system, really helping folks feel a little bit more knowledgeable and even in control of their own bodies and nervous systems. Because with anxiety, what can be so overwhelming is this lack of control, right? We feel like we can't control it. But the second half, there's really 3 main sections, is about relationships and understanding that we are we are social beings. We can't be well alone. And hyper individualism is one of our diseases that causes anxiety. This internalization of a message that I can't need anybody, I have to be independent. Well, we can't, we have to be interdependent.
Mhm.
And then the third part of the book is about connecting to what I call the global heart, that now we are being asked to be global citizens. We are, this from your work, right? We're so aware of trauma and things going on the other side of the planet. And that can be really overwhelming and it cause people to shut down. But how do we actually use that as a way to open our hearts even bigger without being overwhelmed? And everybody has a different role to play in being a global citizen, but finding a way to be in relationship with that is also really important. And that's where I really pull together this connection of social justice and equity, that we're not well until everybody is well. And if there's one thing the coronavirus taught us, it is that, right? Until our most vulnerable are okay, nobody can be okay. And so when we acknowledge that, we can live our lives in service of collective well-being. And for some people, that's what eases their anxiety. Even if they're not going to see the results in their lifetime, feeling like we are part of this larger movement towards collective well-being can be the missing piece for people.
Thank you for sharing that. And I will put all the links for people to follow you and buy your book and all of that in the description box. And so I really appreciate the time that you shared with me and the wisdom that you've shared in this space. It's such a joy to be able to share this energy with you. So I'm really grateful.